Hi there, and welcome to Ian's Engage channel. I'm Ian. In the previous video in this series, I signed off by showing a list of things that needed to be done to complete the first section of the tricky bit. In this video, I'm going to show how I've started to tackle the list, starting with working out where the dropper wires will go. First of all, in what may be considered a controversial step, I decided that I wasn't going to add dropper wires to the points. I wasn't expecting them to fail, but if they did, they'd be easier to remove and replace if they didn't have dropper wires connected. My thinking was that power would be supplied to the track connected to either side of each point, and that the rail joiners would be quite capable of transferring that power. So with this in mind, I marked where I wanted to place dropper wires close to the end of each track nearest each point. I also needed to take into account droppers that would eventually be used for block detection, which I decided to place at the end of each track as it exited the section. I used a paint pen to mark the sleeper tops near to where the wiring would be soldered to adjacent rails, and also mark the cork in between the sleepers. To ensure I didn't mix up the pieces of track, I also marked them where they met each point. The plan was to leave the points in place along with the push rods that operated them, but to remove the rest of the track and the servos from their enclosure boxes. The only fly in the ointment was that I needed to drill through where the frog wires were, which obviously wasn't possible without removing the points. However, I wondered if I could use cocktail sticks to mark the foam below, so had a test run to see if a cocktail stick could be inserted alongside the frog wire. And to my complete delight, it could. I then began the job of disassembly proper. I was careful to keep track of which servo came from which enclosure box and used small storage jars to store each servo motor and its point rodding where required. I needed to provide some wiggle room to remove one of the servos, but eventually achieved my goal of keeping the points in place. Once the servos were gone, I removed the remaining pieces of track so I was left with only the points and the marks I'd made in the cork showing where I'd need to drill holes for the dropper wires. It was then time to use my drill guide tool for the first time. The drill guide ensured that holes I drilled were straight and perpendicular to the baseboard. As you can see, I used a cocktail stick to make sure that I was centering the drill guide correctly over the dropper wire hole. Unfortunately, while all of the holes I drilled were straight and perpendicular, somehow I managed to completely misplace one of them, meaning it needed to be re-drilled, but it all worked out fine in the end. The next step was to take the section from the workbench to the train room. After positioning it in its final position, I used it as a template, drilling through the holes I'd just made in order to make marks in the foam below. Next, I removed the section in order to push cocktail sticks through the holes for the frog wires. Once back in position, I pushed the cocktail sticks far enough into the foam below so that I could remove the section again and leave the cocktail sticks still standing in the foam below. And holes were drilled all the way through the foam and through the plywood baseboard below. You may be wondering why I didn't use the drill guide here. Well, to cut a long story short, unfortunately, I didn't have a long enough 6mm drill bit to go through the drill guide, the foam and the plywood. The final preparation work was to drill holes for the servo's connector wires. Once again, I placed the section in its final position and used a bradawl to mark where the holes were in the bottom of the servo enclosure boxes. After removing this section, yet again, the marks could be seen on the foam below. Now this is where I encountered some problems. That's not going to work, is it? The first problem was that the rightmost servo was aligned above quite a lot of baseboard framing. I always knew this was the case, and, of course, I had a plan to get around it. However, the second problem was that after I drilled a hole for the middle servo, the wires came out behind the baseboard frame and next to the wall, and that was something that I certainly wasn't expecting. So now the moment I always dreaded had now arrived, and I had to go below the baseboard to investigate. The majority of the holes I drilled were fine. However, the exploratory hole I drilled for the middle servo wire was not fine at all. It turned out that because I couldn't get the drill close enough to the wall, I drilled it down at an angle. Ah, if only I could have used the drill guide. But of course there wasn't enough room to position it. This meant that I drilled a hole through the side of the framework, and when I tried to push a wire through, it had come out behind the frame. This was a problem. However, after mulling it over with a mug of coffee, I thought I'd come up with a good solution. I'll leave that for next time though, otherwise this video will never get made. Okay, so that's about it for this update. I'd hoped to have been a bit further on than I am, but in my defence I've had a dose of man flu, which was the cause of all the sniffing in the video footage, so sorry about that. Also, I've been watching far too much football with the Euros taking place, which has kept me away from all things Shelfington. Needless to say that I hope to get the first section of the tricky bit fully installed in part 6 of this series. I've got a good idea for solving the problem of getting the servo motor wires below the layout, and it shouldn't be too difficult to implement. Let me know if you've ever encountered problems that have stopped your build in its tracks, and whether you were able to solve it or if you had to change plans completely. Alternatively, if you've got any hints, tips, useful tools or techniques to pass on to a beginner in Engage modelling, or if you simply want to say hello, then please do so in the comments section. Anything and everything you've got to say will be greatly appreciated. In the meantime, thanks ever so much for watching. Hopefully I'll have another update on my progress soon. Bye.